David from Michigan. Go ahead and present your question to Rabbi.
Hi, how you doing, Rabbi? I hope you had a good Shabbos.
Yes.
And thank you for all your work, by the way. So my question is, I always kind of wonder this, based off Matthew 5:17, what Jesus said, about the law, nothing can be changed. Do you feel like maybe Jesus had a whole different idea for Christianity compared to what Paul turned it into? Like maybe Jesus just wanted Christianity to be another kind of sect of rabbinic Judaism. And that's pretty much it.
That's a good question. They do seem to teach differently, so.
Yeah, has been said that if you would have locked Matthew and Paul into a room, that only one of them would have come out alive.
That's funny.
In that Matthew, in the Sermon on the Mount, which stretches over 3 chapters, Matthew 5 through 7, the author seems to convey that Jesus was stating that he did not come to destroy the law, but to fulfill it. And in fact, anyone who changes even the smallest part of it would be considered least in the kingdom of heaven. And unless your righteousness exceeded that of the Pharisees and scribes, which is the same thing, which was the gold standard. That means Orthodox Jews. A Pharisee means exactly the same thing as an Orthodox Jew does today. The term Orthodox Jew was coined just a couple of centuries ago, but it means exactly the same thing. So unless your observance exceeds that, then you can't even enter heaven. That's what seems to be conveyed there. And the bias is, when trying to understand the historical Jesus, is using a methodology called verisimilitude. You can hear those 2 words in there, verisimilitude. That's something that would be similar to what we would expect an Orthodox Jewish boy from the Galilee. What would he be like? He'd be pro-Torah, and he didn't come to undermine Torah. And all the stuff that Paul is introducing, that the law has been done with, it's been made an end to, whatever was accomplished and it's finished, it's over with, that's a later Pauline accretion. We see, however, what's intriguing is following these famed passages you quoted from, we have a series of passages called the antitheses, which we are told that Jesus says that you have heard, meaning referring to Moses, that Moses said this, that if you carry out an act of adultery, so then you have sinned. I say unto you that if you've looked upon a woman with lust in your heart, you've already committed adultery. So that is very intriguing. So you're correct in that your reading of Matthew 5, 17, 18, 19, 20 would read that way, would convey that. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't share with you that the vast majority of Christians interpret this as Christ fulfilled the law for us, and therefore we don't have to keep it. That's how most Christians do it. And I don't think they're doing that because they're being deceptive. I think that's what they're hearing in the church. And number 2 is the book of Matthew and the letters of Paul both appear in the New Testament. So they have to make sense out of the 2 of them. If Christ is the termination of the law, or he fulfills it all, well, how does that work with Matthew? So what Matthew is therefore saying is that Jesus fulfilled the law for us. But those who are pronomian, meaning those who believe that the original Jesus wanted us to keep Torah, so they certainly rely on Matthew 5:17, and antinomian Christians have a hard time. They have to make sense out of it, but their explanations are torturous. What I think people miss is the antitheses. The antitheses stretch for many passages in the 20s all the way to the 40s, which is then, it conveys that, in fact, if you already feel anger at someone, you already murdered him. If you feel lust in your heart towards a woman, you already committed adultery. Now, what are those? So he's saying you, and this is very important. In the Sermon on the Mount, he is saying in chapter 5 that you have heard, meaning if you look at the Torah of Moses in brackets, that only if you actually commit the act of adultery, so then you've committed the sin. But I'm saying to you that if you want to commit the sin and you feel lust in your heart, you've already did it. Now, what does that do? So that's a modifier. And I think that modifier does shed new light on Matthew 5, 17, 18. And the modifying is saying that you can't do that. Because you can say, well, I would like to sleep with that man, but I'm a married woman, so I won't. That woman is very, very pretty. My wife is far away. I'm in Las Vegas. What goes on in Vegas stays in Vegas. So I'm not going to do it. I feel desire to do it, but I'm not going to sleep with that man, even though he's very attractive and even though my husband would never find out. But I'm not going to do it because the God of Israel said that this is a forbidden relationship. So in the Jewish faith, the woman who feels lust in her heart but doesn't follow up on it, so she's considered a much greater person. She had the opportunity, he had the opportunity, but he resists that opportunity, so that's the person greater. In the antitheses of Matthew 5, which is acting as a modifier, is saying that you can't do it. Because while you can abstain from committing adultery, the actual act of adultery, no one cannot feel any lust. That's not possible. It's not humanly possible unless you live on a deserted island with just you and your wife. So there are islands like that in Indonesia which are completely uninhabited. So what is happening in the antitheses is that Matthew, is the author of the first gospel, is conveying that Jesus wants you to know that you can't do it. Follow? You cannot do it. And therefore, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the Pharisees and scribes, which is very intriguing. Why does it say exceeds that of the Pharisees and scribes? Why don't you just say, unless your righteousness is the same as the Pharisees? Because exceeds means the Pharisees taught that if you commit the act, you sin, and conversely, if you resist the lust, and you turn to many people who would commit many sins, but they don't do it, even though they want to do it, because they fear Hashem, they fear heaven. So it is the modifier of the antitheses that really then places Matthew 5, 17, 18, 19, 20 in a new light, where we see Paul's view creeping in. You can't, because Paul held, this is very important, that theoretically, if you can keep the law, then you don't need Jesus. In Paul's view, if you can keep the Torah of Moses, then you don't need Jesus. But Paul held, and he articulates this very clearly in example in Romans chapter 3, that no one can do that, misquoting the Hebrew Bible. So really, what many people think is the case is not really the case, because the Sermon on the Mount is modifying that, it has to exceed the fact, and then no one can really do that. And I think that's what's coming across there. But all that said, it is certain that Paul is conveying a way more hostility towards the ritual commandments than we find anywhere in the Gospels. So that's a really great question. Thank you so much.
If you enjoy this channel and the content, and it has changed your life, or perhaps the life of a loved one or a close friend, would you please consider supporting this work? You can click this link and it'll take you directly to my website with the donate button. Or there's a Patreon link and a mailing address for snail mail if you would prefer. If you do donate, please do me a favor and leave me a phone number where I can contact you and thank you properly. I hope you all have a wonderful 2025. Shalom.